I've marked my top fabric. My blue is behind. Right sides are together. Just for illustration, I had drawn the red lines. Those will be my sewing lines. I want to sew along the bias while the square is still woven together, so there is very little stretch. The straight of grain fabric is along the edges. I've cut this larger so that I can trim down to make it the exact size for the block we're going to be building. I'm going to sew on the red lines, which in your case you may mark them, you may not, but they are 1/4 inch from the black line. I'll adjust my sewing needle. Always making sure my thread is out so it doesn't get tangled underneath. I'm going to stop at this other black line. Turn the square. I see that line was marked a little more than 1/4 inch, which is fine because I ended up giving myself a little extra in cutting 4.5 inch squares. And I will go to cut this on the rotary cutting mat. Be right back. I cut all the dark black lines, which creates the bias edge here. The outside edges are in the straight of grain. And this is also the straight of grain. What I'm going to do is press towards the white. And I'll just finger press at this moment. Before I sew these together, I want to make sure that this cut line is perpendicular to this sewn line on both of these so I don't get any wave. And there's enough fabric that's been allowed that if you take your straight edge there's been enough fabric allowed that if you take your straight edge, align one of the crosshairs on the folded pressed line, you can trim up anything that is over or cut a little crooked on both of those. And assuming that I would do that right now, but I'm not going to. Then you will put these two together. The seams will nest. They'll be straight, and you'll sew straight across, and you can see how this one is not. And I don't want to stretch it. That's going to just make your block wonky. So this will have to be trimmed. You'll sew across there. When you open it, you'll have a block like this, which will need to be trimmed down. After the seam is in, you'll want to bend those intersections, just those few threads out of there, so that when you're sewing or when you're ironing, this seam will fold this way, this one will fold this way, and you'll get a nice block, which will, after you get it sewn, will have to be trimmed down to 3.5 inches.